I've treated hundreds of patients and trained thousands of healthcare professionals over my 15-year career. And one thing I've learned through that experience is that most people are really confused about supplements, or they lack a clear strategy or plan for how to use supplements to improve their health. That's why I created Adapt Naturals. It's a supplement line designed to add back in what the modern world has squeezed out and help you feel and perform your best. Our ancestors' diets were rich in the essential vitamins and minerals and phytonutrients we need for optimal function. But today, thanks to declining soil quality, a growing toxic burden, and other challenges in the modern world, most of us are not getting enough of these critical nutrients. I formulated Adapt Naturals using the principles of evolutionary biology and modern research to fill the nutrient gaps that we face today and replicate the nutrient intakes found in an optimal ancestral diet. Our flagship offering is called the Core Plus Bundle, a daily stack of 5 products that gives you everything you need each day, from essential vitamins and minerals like B12, folate, magnesium, and vitamin D, to phytonutrients like bioflavonoids, carotenoids, and beta-glucans. You can also order the products in the bundle separately if that works better for your needs. The Adapt Naturals products are made from the highest quality, food-based, or bioidentical ingredients. From cellular and immune health to brain and nervous system support to blood sugar and heart health, we've got you covered. Your supplement cupboard is about to get a lot smaller. We also created an app called Core Reset to help you get your nutrition, sleep, movement, and stress management dialed in. Because no matter how good our supplements are, and they are really good, you can't supplement yourself out of a bad diet and lifestyle. The best part is that you get this app at no additional cost when you order the Core Plus bundle. Head over to adaptnaturals.com, that's ADAPT naturals.com, to learn more and start feeling and performing your best. Let's talk amino acids for a moment. On my recent episode, Why Amino Acids Are the Building Blocks of Life, I discuss why we need amino acids at all stages of life and how Kion aminos can help you live a long, active, healthy life. To truly understand just how vital amino acids are for health, think about your body and what it's made of. You've probably heard before that it's made up of mostly water. What you probably haven't heard is that everything else in your body is 50% amino acids. These building blocks of life are essential for health and fitness. This is why Kion Aminos is my fundamental supplement for fitness. I drink them every day for energy, muscle, and recovery. Kion Aminos is backed by over 20 years of clinical research, has the highest quality ingredients, no fillers or junk, undergoes rigorous quality testing, and tastes amazing with all natural flavors. So if you want to naturally boost energy, build lean muscle, and enhance athletic recovery, you need to get Kion Aminos. You can now save 20% on monthly deliveries and 10% on one-time purchases. Just go to getkion.com/Kresser. That's getkion.com/Kresser to get my fundamental supplement for fitness, Kion Aminos. Hey everybody, Chris Kresser here. Welcome to another episode of Revolution Health Radio. Most of us go our entire lives without thinking much about our feet. But as we'll discuss in this show, that's a huge mistake because our feet are the platform that supports our entire body, sometimes 6 feet of it plus and 250 pounds plus. And yet we have rarely developed the same sense of awareness and articulation in our feet and our toes that we have with our hands, for example. And while we don't need that same level to be able to move in a healthy and functional way, we do need more often than we have. And that's what I'm going to talk about today with Graham Tuttle. So he's a strength and conditioning coach that merges physical therapy with performance to help people get out of pain and be able to move better. Graham is known for many of his programs. The most popular is called Ready to Run. It's a 28-day program to rebuild feet, ankles, and lower legs for pain-free running and movement. And I've been aware of his work for some time, and I know many people who absolutely swear by it, who've developed various injuries or lack of mobility throughout their life, either from being too sedentary or being too active in the wrong ways. And they've used his programs to recover their movement and get out of pain. So this was a fascinating conversation. It's something that's of interest to me. I'm really passionate about the body and all the different ways that it works. And as you may know, my wife is a Feldenkrais practitioner. So I pay a lot of attention to the neurology of movement and neuroplasticity and how that informs body awareness and movement. So I think this will be a really interesting conversation for you if you're also interested in these topics. And I certainly learned a lot. I hope you will too. Let's dive in. Graham, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you on.
It's a pleasure to be had. Thank you for taking the opportunity to let me ramble a little bit.
So you have a bit of a unique story in that growing up, you were not an athlete. It was not you don't have this history of like when you were 5 years old, you were crushing it and this or that, and it just came later for you. So tell us a little bit about that.
So if there's one piece of like I guess anything about my life that I think is of merit to I don't know describe to other people, it's like the idea that for most people the idea of like athleticism just didn't come that naturally. I think that's probably something that ancestrally we would have had a little bit more of just a natural environment to develop that. But like I grew up in very poor eyesight. So you wear glasses. What's your prescription of your glasses, by the way? Are you nearsighted, farsighted?
These are readers,
Oh,
but that also have blue light um, filtering that I use when I'm close to the computer screen, like I am now.
that makes sense. So, like for me, growing up with glasses, you develop a lot. Well, you don't develop a depth perception. So basically, I have very poor eyesight. So it was the idea. I wear contacts now, but if you could imagine like taking your hand to the side of your glasses and not being able to see clearly to the side, your brain just kind of doesn't really develop the neuromuscular like proprioceptive feedback of just your surroundings. So like things that kind of move really quick kind of throw me off. And so a lot of that, like I had all the desire to be athletic, to be able to run and jump and play and do this stuff, but I didn't have the physical skill set or the capacity or the mental skill. So one of those things is like process of backing into that was learning how to eat well, learning how to move, take care of myself, kind of undo this stuff because it it's an interesting idea of like I think as humans we're meant to be in inertia. We are in motion, moving in a direction and without a direction we'll end up going somewhere. And so I think like for me for example I was just doing eating whatever was put in front of me, doing whatever the meatheads in the gym were like lifting in terms of working out. Like I needed physical activity to go and move towards, but without any type of like intangible skill or structure around that, then I ended up in a place where I was in pain. A lot of joints hurt, a lot of my muscle, my fascia was stiff, and I like very like bound up person. So, I think it's more of a cost of our modern society. Whereas, like, if we were in a tribe where we sat in the ground and moved around all day, like, even without, like, that is the structure. Like, the formless existence we lived in would have been some form of like, a guide for our body to move. But when you're sitting in 90-degree chairs and you're looking at computer screens and you don't have that guidance, it's like, so ultimately, I backed into that stuff, and it's been a process of learning how to have a body that can move, joints that are healthy, let's say skin, hair, nails, like organs, brain function, everything that works for me. So then I can go practice and play sports because really that's what I want to do is play sports and have fun and run. So
Right. So yeah, I mean that's worth highlighting. Like there's a difference between the kind of movement that somebody might do, or there often is a difference in the gym
mhm,
or even with the sport and what we might call functional movement, which is just how to inhabit your body in a
mhm,
like with ease and power and grace, which I think our ancestors just naturally inherited and
mhm,
developed that ability just by the nature of the way they lived, right? You were saying if you're squatting in a circle rather than sitting in a chair, or and you're moving around a lot, you're moving on ground that is not perfectly level, like a
mhm,
paved sidewalk, and you're not wearing, shoes that have a lift on the heel and a big thick sole, right?
mhm.
So I know this is a major focus for you. It's probably a good segue. We're talking about now about the differences between our ancestral environment, in particular with our feet and the ground that we walk on. You talk a lot about the importance of the feet in movement, which not a lot of people focus on. So how did that become, something that was important for you in your work?
Mm. Well, first, I think it's valuable because I think we do tend to, say, fetishize or idealize ancestral lifestyles. So it's all amazing, everything's perfect. Like I mean, for you, you obviously have done a tremendous amount of research and study. You're an expert in the world of knowledge. It's like of nutrition. It's Yeah, I'm sure you do. You get people to talk about like the ancestral paleo diet. They kind of have this idea like they're walking around eating ribeye steaks and stuff like that. It's like things weren't like that, right? Food wasn't as plentiful. It's like life was very hard. So like we as humans have a very ingrained proclivity towards laziness, and I think that's well merited, right? Like you look at people. It's funny. You look at these ancestral tribes, like the Hadza, or what we see of them that are left now. It's like they're sitting around. They didn't do that much. They don't do a lot of work, and so it's interesting because we have this itch of like a lot of people are drug addicts for exercise combined with this weird like lifestyle. So, it is one thing to look and just keep in mind that like people struggle today because of a let's say we still have that proclivity for I want to take the easy way out and use technology, be lazy, but I also now have access to all the basic activities of daily life. But to help me answer your question a little bit more in terms of like shoes and feet, like what do you do for exercise? I mean, are you a runner? Do you lift weights? Like what does your life look like?
I do a lot. Depends on the season. So right now it's mostly mountain biking and hiking, and then some lifting and strength training on the off days where I'm not mountain biking. And then I ski about 100 days in the
Oh wow.
winter. So that's
Okay.
and that could be downhill skiing, or it could also be backcountry skiing where you're skiing uphill and then skiing downhill. So
How do you ski uphill? Do you like have to lean into the handles and like push off? Because I never understood that. I thought skiing was always just a gravity thing.
so with this particular with it's alpine touring is what it's called. You have skins on the bottom of your skis, and
Oh.
so that creates grip on the snow, and then your bindings are different such that your heel will come up like on a cross country ski. So you
Hmm.
basically are moving forward as your heels are coming up as your ski slides forward, and then because you have the skin on your ski, it grips, and then you as your next leg comes forward, you're basically like pulling yourself up the
Hmm.
hill.
Do you notice a different set of muscles that you're using when you're wearing shoes that like keep your heel flat on the ski versus that can lift up? Like, do you feel tired or fatigued when you're doing it in different
Yeah,
areas?
it's definitely different muscles that are working in downhill versus uphill skiing.
Okay. And then when you're lifting, what shoes do you wear when you're lifting and strength training?
Usually I wear a Vivo barefoot, so they're zero, they're flat sole and they're pretty thin soles.
Okay. And then for hiking, what are you wearing?
Depends on the trail. Like if I generally will also try to wear lower sole, more minimalist footwear, but there are some trails here in Utah that are extremely rocky. So
Yeah.
in those cases, especially if I'm carrying a pack,
Oh,
and I'm backpacking, I'll wear like La Sportiva kind of lightweight trail runner type of shoes.
okay.
So there's still less substantial. I'm not wearing like big hiking
Yeah.
boots at any
Okay.
point, but it's kind of spectrum.
Yeah. Have you ever had any like ankle sprains, foot pain, like a plantar fasciitis, turf toe? None of
Not
those
as an
things?
adult. I was a basketball player in high school, and I definitely rolled plenty of ankles
Okay.
then. But I since then I haven't had any injuries like that.
Well, good. So one of the things, and well, I guess the other question to have is, and this it's appropriate for the answer to your original question. When did you start to transition? I'm assuming as a basketball player, unless you were wearing like Converse All Stars. When did you transition into like more minimalist, like understanding kind of like let's say a flat toe, because that's not the norm for most footwear.
Yeah,
So like especially hiking.
probably 8 or 10 years ago. I would say.
Okay. What was the motivation to change that?
I also grew up, as a surfer most of my life and not wearing
Okay.
shoes for most of my life, on the beach and running on the beach barefoot in the soft sand or on the hard
Mhm.
sand, and just and did martial arts, and that was always barefoot and just was more comfortable without like big heavy shoes. And then, around that 15 years ago, I met Mark Sisson,
Mhm.
and he was big into the whole Vibram five fingers thing, which I never got into myself, but I was exposed to that idea and then started experimenting a little bit with. I was never dogmatic about it, and I didn't ever wear those
Yeah.
particular shoes. But I was just like, oh, how's this? Let's look at it like an experiment. How's it going to feel? What's going to be different? When do I like having more of a sole? When do I like not having a sole? When do I like being completely barefoot? And I kind of worked out something that feel like that I'm comfortable with now. And it's like I said, it's a range depending on what the activity is and what feels best.
Yeah. What was it? Is it the five figures? Those are like my daily drivers, so to speak. I love thinking about your shoes like your car. Um, what is it? Did it just look too weird? Is you just weren't like, all right, I'm cooler than that. Like it's
I'm one of those people where my second toe is significantly longer than my first toe,
okay.
so I can't wear them. It just it's super uncomfortable. It like bends that second toe. They haven't made one
Uh,
for the 3% of the population that has that issue. So
have you just so does that cause you problems in other shoes? Do you have to size up, or like do
yeah,
you just like bump that
sometimes
toe in?
yeah, like my La Sportiva backpacking trekking shoes are I actually didn't size up because the size up just caused other problems. So I just suffer a
Mm,
little bit when I go out
really?
on when I go backpacking. I just have a sore toe at the end of the day.
Yeah. So ultimately, like that's a perfect case study. So when you look at shoes, there's two parts of this shoe dialogue. There's one of which is like we know cognitively that we existed for like what, or at least our ancestors in some form for millions of years without shoes, right? Like there may have been, like the Tarahumara tribe in Born to Run, an example of people that are in like very harsh, hot, like places. Anybody that was in a desert, it's like they have like bare minimum foot protection, but they looked at the shoe as this like form of foot protection. So it's kind of like it's obviously cumbersome to wear a shoe that wraps on your foot because, as you say, our feet are kind of weird. It's like we're all like there are different size toes, different widths, different heights, different like lengths, and not to mention it's like it's very hard to have a glove for your hand that fits unless you do so. Like if you do manual labor, there's a difference between like big like an oven mitt versus a big blocky glove versus one that's tight. So you think about the technology like the whether it's nylon or plastic or rubber that has to be created in order to have something that actually gets function. So for most of our human history, shoes would have been like, okay, I've got this big rubber or not plastic, but this big rubber or cloth thing that I wrap around my foot for protection from the cold, from the heat, or from like, pressure, impact. But most of the time, it would have been, hey, like kids don't like wearing shoes. They would kick them off and run around, especially for you being a beach bum, going around, surfing. By the way, I got to give you props for surfing. I spent about 3 hours in the ocean trying to sit on a board. Like, no one even tells you this about surfing. Like, I get out there and I just like, first off, the waves look so small when you're walking out, and you get out there like, oh my god, they're like tsunamis, like 5 feet in the air, and no one tells you that it's hard to sit on the board. Everyone's like, it's like the requisite just even being able to go surf. It's like I can't even sit on the board, and it's so
Yeah,
hard because it's like you
standing
don't.
up is the easy part. It's true. Like
It's crazy.
sitting on the board, catching the wave is also the next hardest part. Standing up is the easy
Yeah.
part for sure.
So like you spend hours. I spent 3 hours over the span of 2 days, and it's like, but of that, I got maybe like 25 or 30 chances to even try it. So it's like it's so hard to like even learn the skill because it's like I can't even get into the door. Like I can't even get in the bar, like in the door to try the skill because every time a wave comes, I'm like too late, too soon. Too soon is always rough because then you just get nailed. But so props to you for that. But when you grow up in a beach bum and you're playing and running around and doing stuff, it's like you just learn to use your feet. So I would not be surprised if you had some inherent capacity to move your toes and wiggle just from years of doing it, just kind of like riding a bike or moving your hands. We take for granted that we can make these shapes with our hands and fingers. Well, that's what our feet can do. But when we incapacitate them and put them in a cast, we lose that. So ultimately, for that, it's like we know that our feet have the capacity to do this stuff, but we also know that humans are designed to create technology that makes our lives easier. So it's like, this is where the blending, and it's like when we forget that we have the capacity and we only rely on the technology. And so this would be, you probably see this some with like people that over supplement and then lose the value. Like, oh, what pill should I take? It's like, hey, it's got real food, but there's like things like water and the discussion around this stuff, sunlight and sleep. Those are the base nutrients our body needs, and people want to just supplement. They just want to go to the technology. They want to get the greens mix. It's like stuff can be good, but ultimately we are animals that evolved in an environment. And when we lose that environment, we lose the function. So I think there's two parts of this. One of which is like people have been conveniently led to think that the feet are weak and fragile. So 1972 is when Nike creates the Cortez. So that's I think Bill Bowerman, who it was Blue Ribbon Sports was the name of the first company. He was a track coach up at Oregon, and so he goes and he has this basically this idea that you could attach fabric over like the sole. It's polyethylene EVA, ethylene polyacetate, something like that. It's a fancy word. I'm just a personal trainer, so I don't know these fancy science words. But they figured that stuff out, so they put it together. And so he starts selling these very thinnish foam soled shoes under like out of the back of his car. And this is right after he goes down to New Zealand and meets his coach, Coach Lilliard, who is like their Olympic track coach, Olympic running coach down in New Zealand for their team. And he had come up with this idea of jogging. And so jogging was something that was created in 1967. And Bill Bowerman came back, wrote a book about it, and it kind of took over the popular interface of like jogging. And Farrah Fawcett's running, it's all over. Like people started picking up because jogging is something that's like it's supposed to be this bridge between walking and running. Where walking, you have one foot in contact with the ground at all times. So it's stance phase, meaning I'm bouncing on one foot and I shift over. I'm always touching the ground. Running is anything that moves past that is jumping. So like I'm basically hopping. Even at a low pace, I'm jumping foot to foot. And so you can visualize this. If you were to jump rope, there is no height at which you would jump rope that you would want to land on your heels. Even if it's a baby hop, it's very uncomfortable and it's also inefficient. So they kind of have this idea, it's like this race walk pace, and it's meant to be done on your heels. And so conveniently, Bill Bowerman says, well, this is really uncomfortable to do. So he comes back and has pads under the shoe. And so then it starts to take off. So jogging takes off. You get 25 million Americans in the 70s start to take up running because this is at, I don't, whether you call it seed oils, whether you call it technological advantage, whether you call it just excess food, whatever it is, we started to have these metabolic diseases cropping up in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So somewhere around the 60s, 70s, people are like, we got to do something. We can't just sit around. We need to actually add in activity. Because before that, fitness and exercise wasn't part of the mainstream dialogue. So, you start to see this. So what can we do? Well, there are no gym memberships on every corner like there are now. And so people like, that lifting weights is weird. It was for the circus freaks, the people that are going to go to the strongman competition and go like flex. And it's, like if lifting weights is not healthy, you see doctors like they were still tell people to smoke cigarettes at this time, right? And so
Right.
people are like, well, what can I do? Well, let me go for a walk. Well, I'm going to try jogging. Did you hear about Craig? He's tried jogging, and you want to try it? It's like we got to jog, and it's like it's funny to us to think about it now, but it became this like new thing. Everyone goes do it, go and do it. But when you get people that have had the benefit of technology for 20, 30 years, but they're kind of wearing shoes a little bit, but they're not, but they've been sitting around, we now have desks and people are more sedentary than they were in any previous point in history. They're not prepped for that. They're not ready for that. So what do you expect? They start to get injured. Shin splints, heel, plantar fasciitis, little aches and pains that crop up. And so you see in response to this, it's kind of like, I sell you a drug, you get addicted to it, you suffer the externality, so I sell you more of the drug. Oh, we're going to fix you with the next thing. And so like I'm literally like drugs, like heroin, stuff like that. There's like this propagating thing where people, I sell you a shoe and tell you to go run on your heels. It causes pain. I tell you, oh, you need a bigger shoe. Actually, you overpronate. Actually, you have a collapsed arch. Actually, you have a bunion. And so I give you all these diagnoses and then give you more products to do it that ultimately are band-aids. So our entire interface with shoes, modernly speaking, or speaking as a modern person, is the last 50 years where the shoe was something that kind of looked like a foot that became this massive swollen engorged thing like a hoka that is 2 inches off the ground, that's curved toe, curved heel, comes to a point at each side, like it's like a boat that's like it's like an elf meta pillow. And so that's what we've been told, hey, this is footwear. But also your feet are weak, they're incapable, they need support. And so what's been conveniently lost is that, hey, your feet are the support. And instead of having a conversation like every other part of the body, if you wanted to lift weights and your grip is weak, I wouldn't tell you to go wear straps or, just say, well, your grip's weak, it is what it is. I would tell you to go work on your grip. How do you work on your grip? You go hang, you hold stuff, you use your hands, you embrace the burning of the muscle engagement, you use your fingers, you get more coordination and dexterity. Yet we don't think about the feet. They're the same anatomically speaking. They're obviously slightly different, but there's 26 bones in each foot, 27 bones in the hand. They have their phalanges, which are the little bones that make up the bendable components of the digits. You got your metatarsals in your feet, and metacarpals are the long bones that make up the meat of the hand. And then you got your carpals at the base of your palm of your hand, and your tarsals under your heel. The same stuff. And yet, for whatever reason, it's conveniently been told to us that yeah, your feet are just, I don't know, they're kind of weird. They're like, you're weak and you need to have this shoe. And so ultimately, that's what gets people to the point where, unlike you, where you have 5, 10, 15, 20 years of being a beach bum and running around and using your feet, or you look at someone like Eliud Kipchoge, who is now the spokesperson, the not spokesperson, but the poster child for the Nike Alpha Fly Next Percent, this like $270 shoe. It is amazing. Don't get me wrong. That thing, you feel like you're flying. But when someone goes and they've been wearing little baby tiny Michael Jordan Air Force Ones since age of one because they're so cute, and they walk around and then they go to school and it's like, well, little John needs to wear shoes. His feet, literally, it's like if I took your hand and just wrapped it up, you would lose not only the muscle, but also the ability to control that. And then you have no choice but to continue wearing shoes. And then you don't develop the tension in your fascial lines, your tendons, your ligaments, your muscles, the bones. Everything is weaker and collapses in. So we get deformed feet. But in response to that, say, well, it's not that you didn't use your feet. It's your feet are just that way. It's genetics. You are genetically predisposed to have a bunion. We have flat feet. It is what it is. Accept it. But also, you're going to need to wear orthotics that cost you $200, and you're going to have to change your shoes every 3 months, and also get this brace and wear these socks and have this ankle compression sleeve. And it's so convenient for these companies that we just, you know what? I don't know what those people used to do before 1970, but you need all these products, and you're trapped. Does that make sense? I know a little
Yeah,
rant, but like,
no, definitely. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, so my wife is a Feldenkrais practitioner, and she talks. One of the things she says a lot is that, the thing that's different about your feet and your hands is you don't walk around on your hands. Your hands are not responsible for supporting your entire body. I mean, it's kind of
mhm,
amazing when you think about it that the feet are not really that big, they're not really that wide, and yet they support, in some cases, 250 plus pounds of weight
yeah,
and vertical height, 6 feet of height, and not just standing there stationary, like moving around in
yeah,
lots of different ways. So, the feet have an incredible responsibility and job to do. And yet,
mhm,
as you pointed out, we've really sort of just consigned them to this. I mean, I think a lot of people really just don't think about their feet at all.
never.
And then if there is any thought, it's more like, what shoe should I get? Because we've been conditioned to believe that. And I can't
Yeah.
remember where this saying came from. It might be from Moshe Feldenkrais, the founder of that method, but I think he said we die from the feet up, which is like a mind blowing concept
Mhm.
to think about. I'm
Yeah.
sure it resonates with you, and you understand what he meant by that. But it's that important.
Well, give more. So there's two parts of that I think are fascinating. The way I try to describe this to people to help make sense is that, like, all right, so you have one piece of skin on your body, right? It's like the inside of your, I don't know, your mouth is the same piece of skin as the bottom of your foot. It is just, you're wrapped in one piece. There's no sutures on your body. Underneath that, we have fascia, which is this kind of like more nebulous concept that unfortunately now people are getting awareness of it, but they're also using it as a bucket term of like, that's just your fascia. But basically, it's a connective tissue that wraps around underneath your skin and connects your muscles and your bones and wraps on your organs. So it holds things together. So because there is one connected unit in your body, it's like a shirt. If you have your shirt and I take the bottom of my shirt and grab a bit and then pull it down, it stretches everything out because all the fibers of my shirt are connected. So in the same way, if I take my feet and I contract them and hold that, it creates a tension that pulls from the body. The loss of circulation. It's interesting because you look at someone like with diabetes, right? So one of the things you see is a long term, like I don't know what you call it, but like edema, swelling, where they have to get the feet amputated.
Yep.
I'm not
Peripheral.
so sorry. What was it called?
It's often caused by peripheral neuropathy in the
Yeah.
extremities, and they lose circulation. Yeah, and have to get that amputated.
So part of that, obviously, there goes into the way that the inner portions of the body are functioning. But there's a physiological, like you could think of the calves as a second pump for the heart. If we don't get muscle, because the veins don't have an active like pump, they don't constrict and push blood up. They just have what do you call it, like valves that prevent backflow. So if our muscles aren't pushing lymph and fluid up, then we don't have that. And so if I've never moved my toes, it's kind of like if you sit on the edge of a ledge and your feet hang and they fall asleep and you hop off and it's like pins and needles. part of me is like, okay, well, obviously there is metabolic dysfunction going on, but I wouldn't be surprised if a huge portion of that was just the fact that they're not moving their toes, they're not moving their feet, and they get cold. You look at certain things, but they don't have the capacity to do it. So it is like you do see this loss of like, I can't push fluid back up, I can't, and then my feet get swollen, the skin gets stiff, and so you do start to die because the death is tissue stillness, meaning like when we are still, are we are dying. And I'm not saying still like there's a part of like internal stillness, but our heart is always beating, our organs are always pushing fluid around, and so our bodies are meant to move. And so when the tissues don't move, we start to die because they lose circulation, they get dehydrated, and they literally start to stiffen up and become necrotic. So the same thing, when you start to lose that, you lose the function, you die from the feet up. It is amazing to think about. So like when you look at the feet, just a simple test of this stuff. And so this is an interesting point on what you're saying, or your wife's point of like you're standing with 250 pounds or 6 feet up. One of the things, if you've ever tried to do any hand balancing, so like I don't know if you do any yoga, like a crow pose or handstand, you ever try to play around with any of that stuff?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
For people, so myself included, who again like trying to learn all these skills, like how to move, how to run, how to do yoga, how to hand balance, it's very, we don't think about like I have to use my fingers to press into the ground. So that's one of the things, like you have to get pressure. It's like people just, they want to get up there and they hold their hands stiff, but it's like the best hand balancers use their fingers to actively push and find space. But when we have our toes that are pressed together and basically lose the capacity to spread and make a shape, one of the things people do when they stand is they don't use their toes. And so you think about all the talk about chiropractic. Are you in alignment? You've got the scoliosis, not scoliosis, lordosis in your lower back, or you're rounding over. So much of that is corrected. Because I remember I went, I've not spent much time with a chiropractor, but I remember I got an adjustment. They took some like a video of me. The most striking thing of this was just watching a picture of me from the side. I'm just leaning forward, my shoulders are hunched in. And we talk about like fix your posture. And it always centers around your head, your neck, and your shoulders. Like pull your shoulders back, pull your chin back, stand up straight, push your chest out, right? And what they never tell you is push your toes in the ground. Because if I am standing and my toes are inhibited, I'm going to lean forward, especially if I have a raised heel. It's like a tower. If I just shift one side, it leans me forward. So my knees soften, my back slumps, and my shoulders come over to balance that. I soften all the joints. And the one cue I found is like, just like your wife was saying, when you think about the toes and you restore the capacity to spread the toes, you then give yourself a planting base and you can push in the ground, it leans you back. And it's like literally by leaning back, it forces me to lean my head back, pull my shoulders back. Every single thing up the body lines up when you push your toes in the ground. So there's so much to be said for the semantics of words, like ground yourself, find where you planted, where like look at your feet. Like when you're grounded and in contact with the ground, you have roots. The stronger, that's why I hate pine trees, because they have like a very shallow root system. Like an oak tree has these beautiful roots that spread out, like they're very hard to knock over. So like, do you want spread roots or do you want this? It's like, if I were to push you over, which do you think is going to give you better resilience? Spread out toes or like lock down balls that are on, like, even then it's like, think about most shoes with the toe lift. They don't even touch the ground.
If you're just picking up whatever salt is available at your local grocery store, I'm really excited to tell you about Kalima salt. I first came across it a couple years ago, and right from the start, I knew it was different. It has these large kind of crystals and flakes. It's crunchy, it's bright white, and the taste was different than anything else I'd experienced before. It's a great finishing salt for meat or fish or sprinkling on top of vegetables, and we use it every day in our house. I feel good about buying it because it's free of ocean-borne microplastics, unlike most salts on the market today. And when I buy it, I'm supporting the local salineros who harvest the salt in Mexico. If you want to learn more and check it out for yourself, head over to kressersalt.com, and they have a special offer for Revolution Health Radio listeners where you get a free bag with your first purchase. No discount code necessary. Just go to kressersalt.com. To live your healthiest, longest life, you need to understand what's going on inside your body. People age at different speeds, and generic annual blood work doesn't properly evaluate your biological age, but Inside Tracker does. Inside Tracker is a truly personalized nutrition and performance system designed to extend your health span and slow the aging process. Created by leading scientists in aging, genetics, and biometrics, Inside Tracker analyzes your blood, DNA, and fitness tracking data to identify where you're optimized and where you're not. You'll get a daily action plan with personalized guidance on the right exercise, nutrition, and supplementation for your body. Add Inner Age 2.0 to any plan to calculate your true biological age and see how you're aging from the inside out. For a limited time, get 20% off the entire Inside Tracker store. Just go to insidetracker.com/Chris Kresser. That's insidetracker.com/Chris Kresser. It seems to me that there's also a neuroplasticity element here where
Yes.
if you're in feet or in shoes all the time, especially like constricting shoes, and they're not making, and your toes are jammed together, like you mentioned,
Mhm.
you're not getting input from each individual toe to your brain, and the mental map that your brain has for your feet is going to be incomplete.
Mhm.
And that we know from, neurons that fire together wire together, right? And so if those neurons are not firing, they stop wiring together, and you lose that kind of mental map. And so I think there's this element of like people not even really being able to sense their feet and not
Yes.
being able to move their each toe individually like they can easily with their fingers, because when we were
Mhm.
growing up, we did so much with our fingers, so many, motor activities with our fingers, that we developed this really fine and motor map of our hands
Mhm.
and our fingers, whereas we don't have that with our feet. And it seems to me that that can be part of the problem on how people have this sort of disconnect between their brain and their feet.
There's two parts of that that I think are interesting. One of which is like if you look at babies, like if you ever seen you have I don't know if you have kids or not, but like you see
Hmm.
the little toes, like their feet, they're like moving their toes. You can press in the middle of their foot. You're so cute. They squeeze down. It's so cute, but they're like rapidly moving and they're like feeling and engaging. There are thousands of nerve endings at the bottom of the foot, and you think about it like I'm sure a lot of the work you do centers around like preventing neurodegenerative disease and to keep people's brains healthy. One of the biggest things of that obviously is the food, getting omega 3s and making sure we have the nutrients for the brain, but it's also stimulation, learning skills, getting feedback, try to tune things. There's thousands of nerve endings when they're just subjected to, hey, just think about the regular sock. Even just wearing toe socks can be a big thing because it's the first time people actually feel in between. If you have never pressed in between your toes, your brain forgets that there's even a space there. So even wearing toe socks and pressing in between that, getting that proprioceptive feedback is one thing. But if everything feels the same, you lose stimulation. People that have very ticklish feet, that are sensitive, if you go walk outside and it hurts, just even on anything that's like not perfectly flat and carpeted, then you're losing stimulation. Our brains would have been using the feet as a thermometer for our environment, the texture, the temperature, the gradient, the firmness, the dampness, like all of these thousands of signals that our brain would have naturally been getting. It's not that we have to be consciously aware of it, but think about how much stimulation that is for the brain. So on one thing, getting people to walk barefoot is such a like again, this is just my own perception. I don't know if this is true or not, but it would seem to me to be an incredibly valuable part of keeping a healthy plastic brain, because the more things you can bring into your body, the better. And the other side of that is when people go to actually correct this, it's really frustrating because if you one of the, like my main program that I do is the one I'm best known for, is it's a foot fix program. So like basically, how do you undo this stuff? There's an emotional challenge to doing something that you've lost the skill to do. In a sense, like I don't even know how to do it. So for example, if you look at your hand and I say, all right, touch your pinky and your thumb together. What did you do there? Like what muscle did you do? What did you think about? Did you just like touch? Like I don't know. Me consciously, I don't know what I'm doing to do this. It's happening. There's embodied knowledge in that sense. So if I want to learn how to use chopsticks with my non-dominant hand, I watch what my this side is doing and I try to put those positions and then try to like make those shapes again. So it's a very visual thing. But if I don't have a foot that can move, I don't know. It's amazing how little of a connection we have with our bodies. That's why great athletes, for example, are often have poor coaches, because they're like, I don't know how to tell you to run. I just do it. Just go from here to there. And it's like, or just, just jump a hurdle. It's like there's embodied knowledge that comes from watching, observing, patterning after the people around us. And so when people do try to fix their feet, the first frustration is an emotional one of like, I can't even move my toes. Like, I don't know what to do. And so it's a process of there's a bunch of tips and tricks and tools to kind of work through that. But when you've been told your whole life that your flat arches, the overpronated, you just have a bunion, and it's all genetics. There's nothing you could do. And then you hear someone like you kind of like you hear someone say, "Well, we didn't wear shoes, and you actually shouldn't be in pain, and your body, you're not broken." You want to believe that, right? Because no one wants to believe that they have to. It's very disempowering when a 7-year-old geriatric doctor comes and says, well, Johnny, you're 12, but you got flat feet, so we should probably put you in some custom orthotics. It's like that's easy for him to say because he's going to be dead in 5 years. But this kid that's 12 is now been told that their feet are incapable and can't move. And so they get put in orthotics to fix an ankle sprain or plantar fasciitis for a short-term stint. And then there's no egress. There's no path out of that. And then 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years later, they got stiff knees, their calves are stiff, their ankles don't bend, their feet have gotten weaker, but they're in this position. They've got a peroneal tendonitis. Like all these things are going on, hip pain, low back pain, because they've incapacitated and lost the ability to move their toes because they've taken away the ability to flex, extend, and make shapes. Because they'll say, don't be barefoot. And so when someone's been told that for decades, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, this doesn't make sense. Like I want to be able to not do that. And then they even try. It would be like telling someone that wants to lose weight and you say, hey, let's eat some real food. Okay, we can do that. Now go for a walk. They don't even know how to walk. Like how frustrating is that? Like when you see people that have paralyzed accidents, like they get paralyzed and like the amount of motor, like they're really focused, they have a spinal cord injury, they're trying to walk again. The amount of focus and energy they have to put into every step, it's like they're sweating just trying to move their foot. It's that kind of effort for your toes. And most people, it just is easier to say, well, no, it's just my feet. Like, yeah, that's nice that you can do this, but like my genetics, my doctor told me my genetics are bad. So it's really all that to be said is when people are starting on this journey, it really is an emotional thing at first because they do have to challenge beliefs and they do have to really sit into something that is A, uncomfortable and B, really frustrating. But once they start to get to this process and give yourself a few weeks of momentum, it's like it's amazing how quickly your body bounces back. And then you can heal yourself from the ground up. And it's like unwinding that shirt and you feel the neck just unstretch.
Well, that's the great news about neuroplasticity, right? It's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, if you don't do something for a long time, those pathways start to atrophy and you lose that capacity. But the flip side is that we now know that the whole idea that, we're losing brain cells until the day we die and you can't regenerate any neurons is completely false. And we can build new neural pathways just by, changing our behavior basically. And so it's like a little bit like learning an instrument, right? If you're starting to learn the guitar, it feels super awkward, to play a bar chord or something like that. And your fingers, you're just like, what's going on here? You feel like you have claws. And then after some period of time, your fingers are moving up and down the fretboard with no problem. And it's, I imagine it's the same. So let's say someone's listening to this and, they are wearing shoes most of the time. They feel sort of disconnected from their feet and they suspect that that's causing, pain and limiting their mobility and movement. How would you recommend getting started? Because I'm pretty sure you're not going to say, just take off your shoes and start running 10 miles barefoot, which is what sometimes people do, right? And there's actually some risk there if you just dive right into that.
Absolutely. So there's a few rules of thumb. Like, if you have sock tan lines, you're not ready to go run barefoot. That's always my go. And this is obviously it has to do with a little bit of body composition, but there's some deeper meaning. So like if you look at the back of your hand or the top of your foot, you should be able to see the tension, like the tendon lines that run from the knuckle to the wrist. If you flex your hand and you start to see, depending on the shadow, strong hand, and this is relative strength, so not necessarily objective strength, but strong hands and strong feet have evident tendons, meaning you can maintain, there's like the tension in a suspension bridge. You can see that tension in the cable. So those are things that you want to start doing. The first thing, and so ultimately what I would say, like the gold standard is that you have what I would say is about the healthiest, like what I would want people to get to, which is you spend some time, you have a variation, you have a set of toolkit and you have a set of technologies. When I'm going on sharp rocks or longer distances, I wear some more padding. When I'm doing something that's flat and stable and I want to be able to feel the ground, then I wear less padding. When I don't have to, I wear it barefoot. That's the goal. I'm not going to be dogmatic. And I think that's the problem is people get very dogmatic because it's like, first off, I've been doing this for years and it's still uncomfortable to go walk around like in Vibrams on rocks. It does not feel good. You're like, oh, it just feels like a massage. No, it doesn't. It feels like you're being poked. Whatever you think it feels like to walk on rocks, that's exactly what it feels like. And they did studies where they showed people that were like lifelong barefooters and people that are not. And they found that even though the people that are like lifelong, like the indigenous tribes, They just have thicker calluses, but the feet are just as sensitive. So part of it is learning to deal with discomfort. And I think that's a value because all of our marketing is told you pick out a pair of shoes. The number one question you'll get asked, how do they feel? Are they comfortable? It's like, what are they functional? Can I move my toes? Am I wide? Are my feet falling asleep? Like those matter too. It's not just, am I on a pillow? So expect and understand that it will be uncomfortable. Just like, I remember when I first started lifting weights, you put a bar on your back. It's like, man, this thing is really, it hurts. Like that actually, like this pressure, the thing is pokey. It's in my skin. Like this, and every kid I've worked with did a lot of, I obviously done a lot of, well, obviously, but I've done a lot of coaching with youth athletes. And so you get a kid to squat, they're like, is there a pad? This hurts. I'm like, I know it still hurts. You'll just get used to it. But there is something that's empowering about the idea that your body is strong and capable and you can handle discomfort. And when you can handle discomfort, you can enjoy pleasure and comfort so much better, so much more fully, I should say. So the first part is to understand that like you are stepping into a voluntary path that will be more uncomfortable. And when you accept that, it then sets the stage for everything else. So the first thing I tell people is it depends on a few things. So there's a shoe route and then there's the foot function route. So for the shoe route, there are stepwise functions. So there are 4 factors of a good shoe. There's a width of the toe box, so it's wide enough for your toes to wiggle and move. There's flatness, which is your heel and toe are on the same level, just like you would be if you're barefoot. There's the flexibility of the sole, how well it can bend. And then there's the thinness of the sole, which is the least important. But you can imagine if you have a 2-inch stack depth or height, it's easier to roll an ankle, right? You step on something and you flip because you got 2 inches of leverage working against you. So in so much that you get the first 3 right, so it's flexible, it's wide, and it's flat, those are what matter. The padding is a personal preference. So my recommendation, so the first thing is like, keep your shoes, but take the orthotics out. And again, I understand that for most people, orthotics help them out of a situation. Hokas help them out of a situation. So there is an emotional reliance on that. There is no rush to make this process because you cannot just change your shoes and think it's going to solve it. You have to pair this with the other half we'll come back to, which is moving your foot. But from the shoe perspective, because people are much more likely to say, what shoe should I buy? You want to think about it. Start to move in one of these vectors. Can you get the shoe flatter? Can you get it wider? Can you get it more flexible? And then eventually lower the stack height for appropriate situations. But first, take the orthotic out so that you can bend your shoe. Ease into it. You'll be moving your feet if you do this well. You'll be moving your feet along so and you get circulation. I've never had someone take their orthotic out that actually goes back to pain. And I've worked with over 2,000 people through this course on this point. And I'm not saying it can't happen, but I'm saying ease into it as what you feel confident. So, and that's going to be, I should caveat that, for things that are low stress, like walking, standing, daily activities, weightlifting, those are going to be things you can easily take it out. For running, there's a conversation to be had about form and strength and whether you should even be running if you have to have orthotics in there. But that's that's like a third part, which goes into ego and identity. People have like, well, I'm a runner. I can't not run. I have to scratch my itch because they're drug addicts and they have to do it. There's a part of like you skip the foundation to building strength. And then before you really go and do an activity, like I don't go drive on the highway before I learn to drive in a neighborhood, for example. All that to be said is if you work stepwise down that. So what I recommend people is going from something like a Hoka or any typical Nike shoe to something like an Ultra, a Solstice, or an Escalante, or for hiking a Lone Peak. Ultra is like, that's my number one company for the best of the conventional. Like it's the minimalist conventional, meaning almost all Ultras are wide in the toe box, they're flexible, and they're flat. Then the Solstice and Escalante have about like a 1/2 inch of padding underneath. So it's like just enough that it's soft and you can get away with the fact you're transitioning movement, but they're not overly padded. And the Lone Peak is great because it's a little bit more grip and tread for hiking. So those are my 3.
I've got the Ultra Lone Peak as well. Yeah, it's a great
Perfect.
shoe.
And so those are going to be good things. That's kind of like, I'm going to live in this space while I start to move my toes. But the beauty is that those start to get your feet moving. From there, as your feet get stronger in appropriate situations, you can do a more conventional minimalist shoe, like a Vivo Barefoot or a Zero. Those are going to be fine. They're closed boxes. My personal bias, I do the 5 fingers for everything because they are like functional toe spreaders. Basically, you get the separation of the toes. I wear the toe socks so that my feet don't get stinky, the shoes don't get stinky. That's a big one. But they look weird, and B, like they're not less comfortable than the Vivos because you still feel the ground. But I think they're more functional. They grip, especially for weightlifting. It's like you can't beat that shoe, but they look weird. And people are not accustomed to seeing toes, even though we all have them. It's so funny. I take my 5 fingers off and I'm wearing toe socks, and everybody goes, "You wearing toe socks?" I'm like, "Yes, I'm wearing toe shoes. What did you think?" But you don't have to. So I would say one of those, like the next step would be a minimalist shoe, like a Vivo or a Vibram, a Vivo or a Zero. The next step is to get to like a foot maximalist shoe, which I would say is a 5 finger or one of those sandals. Because when people wear flip flops, And I know this is a lot of information, but when people step, every single step we naturally spread our toes and splay them because it's like we're catching the ground. Like you spread your hand to catch a ball, you spread your toes to catch the ground. If you wear a shoe that doesn't have a heel strap, you're instead of spreading the toes, you have to clench down your toes to keep the shoe from coming off. Very unnatural. And that creates the stiffness like plantar fasciitis and the syndromes we feel on Achilles tendonitis and stuff along those lines. So a minimalist, a barefoot sandal has a strap that goes around the back. Crocs actually work fine for that. They're fine, but they're not ideal. That's a transition for the shoes. So you go from something like an ultra, which is, those things, but you're moving down these metrics. And I would always recommend wearing toe socks with all those, just because like it does get you that like practice of like spreading your toes, putting them on every single day. Those are going to be ideal. You have to pair that with movement, because if you do not get the toes to move and flex and bend, you do not get circulation to the tissues. You do not get the remodeling stimulus. Shoes will not fix your feet. Like I can't, both sides, the minimalist shoes and the maximalist shoes, they make the same lie. Shoes will not fix your feet. The best thing they can do is give you the space within which your feet can move and heal themselves. The only thing you can do to fix your feet is start to move them and use them. I have a program that will walk people through that, but ultimately, take your shoes off, just be barefoot, walk outside for 5 minutes a day on soft grass, just feel the ground more, and you will start to develop this capacity. Last thing I'll say on this is a single take home you could do right now. It's called the hand foot glove. So basically, when you're sitting down watching TV or whatever you do in the evening, you take your fingers and you put them in between your toes. You can use some baby oil if you need, if you're really starting off and at the beginning, or you go one finger at a time. But basically, there's two things going on here. Proprioceptively, we are getting the feedback from our physical touching of ourselves, and we are learning that this part of our body exists. But also, we're doing an anatomically appropriate spacing of our feet. There's a reason your fingers are shaped in similar proportion to your toes. So being able to get your fingers in between your toes, it will be uncomfortable at first, but as you do this, you start to remodel the tissue with a gentle stimulus. And over time, spend 5 minutes a day, spend as much time as you want doing it every day, because eventually you'll need your hands for something else. So it's kind of self-limiting, unlike wearing toe spacers, which I'm not a huge fan of. But we could talk about that if you want to. But that would be the process. There's a lot there, but it's really
Yeah,
simple.
that's great. I mean, it's important to kind of break that down, because as we've been talking about the whole show, like a lot of this is just first of all, it's really kind of developing awareness of your feet and creating that connection between your brain and your awareness and what's going on in your feet and toes.
Mm-hmm.
And then it sounded like also building up the strength of the tendons and the musculature and fascia and all that stuff in the feet, so that your feet don't just feel like blocks down at the bottom there, that there's actually, a similar level of articulation and awareness and dexterity. Maybe obviously not the same as your hands and fingers, but closer. Maybe
They don't need to be.
They don't need to be. And then from there, it's you're thinking about footwear and what you're putting on your feet, and you gave a great breakdown of the different options there and how that might evolve over time. But then the third element is how you're actually moving with your feet and in those. So we only have a few minutes left, but let's talk maybe what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make from that perspective. Let's say they've developed more awareness of their feet. They're starting to go barefoot and have some minimalist footwear. If they are a runner or even just walking, like what are some of the common biomechanical mistakes or habitual patterns that aren't even conscious that people have developed that they need to be aware of?
That's a great question. And one thing I think is important to make a note of is so many people will look and say, I don't need to do running. I don't need to jump. I don't need to do plyometric things. But when you look at the tissue that wraps in and around, what you see in older people is that they get stiff, literally, like their bodies get stiff and they kind of lock down. They actually shrink. It's like their bodies are doing the Benjamin Button thing and kind of collapsing down. So it is part of being a healthy functioning human is having healthy bendable fascia. That is the difference between someone that's elastic and bendy that can fall and bounce back and get up, that youthful bounciness. The studies have shown that even in people that are in 60 that have been previously untrained, doing things like light jump roping and hopping creates that the fibrotic tissue, which is that stiffened, hardened tissue, remodels. So you have to have some form of rhythmic plyometric loading in your body for life. And as a young kid, that could be sprinting. As an older person, it could be these basic little hops like skipping and bouncing. But when we tell people that they're old, and unfortunately, like there's a certain level of, once it's too far gone, it gets harder for people. But when you put someone in a pool and you take out gravity, they lose that stimulus. And that is, you have to have the rhythmic plyometric loading to remodel the tissue. It's scalable, of course, but like it is essential to have healthy tissue, because if you do not have that stimulus on your body, you will age poorly, you will get stiff, and you will lose the mobility of your joints. And then that literally hastens your death in a sense. There's a certain point after which falling is more deadly than cancer. I think like 70.
That's right. Break your hip, die of pneumonia. That's a saying in medicine.
That's the thing, is that like, but how do you not break your hip? Okay, that's single leg strength and foot speed. I need to be able to like if I trip, I pick my foot up and catch myself. And if you want some inspiration, is a 90, well, she's 96, but go Google 91-year-old gymnast. This woman is unbelievable. She will blow your mind. For somebody, it shows what you can do if you just never stop moving. It's amazing. But all that to be said is like, that's the underlying perception of why it matters. Just because you're 45 and you haven't run in 40 years, that does not matter, because when you're 60, you're going to wish you could go back and start this, because your body will remodel, and it is of dire importance for you and for your kids and for your longevity, so you don't end up in a wheelchair dead 10 years before you should. Our health spans are what matter. So all that said is really important. That being said, the two biggest mistakes people do is they don't take the time to learn the correct form of movement. So we talked a little bit earlier where walking is a stance phase, or one foot's in contact with the ground all the time. Anything more than that, even if it's a slow jog, requires a shift, because I'm not jumping from foot to foot. It doesn't matter how slow I'm going. Tell me how low of a jump you need to do when you jump roping to not land on your heels. So there is a level of, I land on the forefoot and I use these dozens of 33 joints and dozens of tendons, muscles, and ligaments to absorb things like a spring. When I land on my heel, I don't have that. To the example of even walking, for example, like if we walk on our heels and overstride, it's very impactful and very painful. So the first mistake is people don't understand that there is a correct way to run. There are multiple variations and nuances within that based off the surface, the speed, the texture, and the visibility of it, the safety of it. But it is always going to be done on the forefoot. Now that's scalable. Your heel may still graze. I'm not talking about your toes, but like the front of your foot, the balls of your feet. The heel may still graze at lower paces, but understanding that. And once you understand that cognitively, you realize there is a certain amount of strength I have to be able to do this. And so just like developing a skill, most people, the progression goes, they're out of shape, they want to get healthy. So they start walking and they do a couch to 5K program. And they don't worry about running, they just want to get you active, because the point is not to learn how to run, the point is to get you to lose weight and get you healthy. So they do a couch to 5K. Then they kind of go like, wow, that was really cool. I'm excited I did that. Maybe I could try 10K, because they think I could do this. I'll just keep doing what I did because it's safe and it's straightforward. Oh, I did 10K. Maybe that'd be big. I could do a half marathon. They do that, and it's like, oh, I could. Then they develop an identity about like, I go and run because it gets me moving. If I don't run, I'm gonna get fat. That was miserable. I never want to go back there. So I'm gonna keep running. But no one ever stopped to say, hey, it's not just about going to Fleet Feet and getting the fancy shoe. It's about going and saying, I've got a set. It's about saying that there is a set of skills and tissue strengths I have to have in order to run correctly. That's why you see guys like Eliud Kipchoge who he was a poor farmer growing up in Kenya. He ran 2 miles to and from school every day. And they're not Nike outlets on the street corner in Kenya. So like you see the decades built up to build the strength and resiliency that he can now go wear those shoes and get benefit from them. But it's not like those are the thing that he got him where he was. So just take a breath and breathe, because it may take time taking off of running where you're just walking and learning to jog and doing some striding and having some barefoot resiliency. But you can go, that's why biking, rowing, skiing, erging, whatever, like any variation and stuff can get that cardiovascular thing up, or just walking. But basically the mistake is people let the ego and identity get wrapped up, and then they won't stop doing something to learn how to do it correctly. So then they get into a long pattern to build up overuse, and then they won't take time off. That's the first mistake that people make. And the second is just not being mindful when they walk. The simple cue I would say there is slightly turn the feet in, feel the ground with the toes, and just practice this. Like think about walking softly, letting the hips and spine move. And think about if you walk softly, that's going to get you a lot, like challenging yourself to walk softly, because people that are like weigh 110 pounds, but they feel like it sounds like the floor is coming down when they walk across, they're slamming with the heels. A lot of stuff there. But if I could summarize that in one thing, go for it. Sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Feel free to
I was going to
summarize.
say, if I summarize it all, is just to say that being intentional about it and treating it as though it is a skill to be learned as opposed to something to be ground through. It's not about grinding through a run. It's about learning to do it so that it's a natural, fluid, effortless thing.
Nice. I just wanted to put in a plug for jumping rope as one of these possibilities, because
Yes.
when I was a teenager, I trained in Muay Thai, which it's funny, most people don't know that. And jumping rope was a huge part of that training, as you can imagine, but both for
Hmm.
fitness, like for conditioning and building up stamina, because it's a pretty brutal sport, and also agility. And
Yeah.
I noticed a huge improvement in my basketball game from once I started training in Muay Thai, and I think it was mostly from the jumping
Jumper
rope and
rope.
all the different ways that that you jump rope in Muay Thai training. And it's something that's just stuck with me, and I love it. I always recommend it to people because
Hmm.
it's the jump rope is what, $15 or something,
Yeah.
it's super cheap. You can take it with you and put it in your bag. You can do it in a hotel room. You can pretty much do it anywhere, and it's pretty accessible for most people, and
Yeah.
it's a great way to like develop that. And if you're doing it barefoot, you really start to develop that felt sense that we're talking about.
Yeah. And one thing that I think people that gets missed on that is when you jump rope, you're jump roping or you're not jump roping. You can't grind through when you're tired. When you're running, there's passive forward cadence that happen with our gait that we can kind of like, especially when you wear shoes, you can just kind of like reach a little bit further and just you can get used to grinding. But jump roping is very clearly ingrained that I'm jump roping for 30 seconds and then like, woo, I'm tired. I use those muscles. And it's a very clear thing where like I can do it and I can't. And if I do it and train, I get better and better and better. So it's like if people treated running like that and just bit the bullet on the first few weeks of like, I'm going to be tired. And when I get tired, I stop and I walk, you would pick it up so much faster. But because they say, well, you could wear heel, if you're running and you get tired, just wear these shoes to help you run further. It's like, no shoes are going to help you jump rope further. That's only your feet. So I really think it's a valuable training tool in so many ways. I love that.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Graham, this has been a fascinating conversation. I know you have some amazing programs on your website that help people to kind of dial in their movement
Mhm.
and take the next step on some of these things, including the feet, ankles, and lower legs, the Ready to Run
Yeah.
program that I think you're
Yes.
best known for. But there are a couple more: Ready to Roll, Ready to Rock, and Unbreakable Athlete. So tell us a little bit about those.
Broadly speaking, I'm just as a curious individual, just going through like how would I do this? Because I suffered from all the things of doing all the things wrong, so to speak. Even though being a cross country and track runner, I had no idea how to run and how the feet work. So it's basically undoing and unbinding myself from the pains that I worked myself into. So the goal is that each of these programs are a month long. So the Ready to Run, Ready to Roll, Ready to Rock. It's a 28-day program with an accompanying 45, 55,000 word book that's broken down into 30 emails. So you get a daily email with program like do this, and then this is the education. So the toolkit of what to do, the education to know why, but then you have the coaching there to empower you and encourage you. So that's the big process. Of each of those are 1 month program, live coaching, live group calls like this where you can ask questions. Those I'm trying to, my goal is to get 100,000 people to go through those because that's like the process of nothing special, nothing unique. It's just this is how the body works. These are the basic things to get your body back moving and how to engage and learn it. It's like I think of it as an elementary school teacher. Like I'm just getting you the alphabet for your body. And if I get people to do that, they'll be out of pain and have the capacity back. The rest of the world, they can do whatever they want. For people that want to do a little more like dynamic stuff, like sprinting and more athletic stuff, that's where the Unbreakable Athlete's like a 3 month program that's a little bit higher level with weightlifting and stuff like that. That's the thing if you want to do it. But like my big goal and driving passion in life is to get people. We go and look at people and tell them to go write poetry, and didn't and without skipping the fact that we never taught them the alphabet. So it's like, hey, this is the alphabet. Let's get you the basics of like how do you move your toes, how do you think about your shoulders, and it's really unwinding the mental, psychological damage that happens when people walk into a doctor and walk out with a diagnosis. I've got hallicus rigidus, whatever. It's like I don't even know what that means in Latin, but it's like I have it, and I guess they just I don't know what he means, but I can't wear shoes anymore, or I can't walk barefoot anymore. So I hate that, and I wouldn't empower people away from it. Much of what you do with the help of nutrition or explain about nutrition, it's like you don't have all these things, you're just deficient. You need to go eat some more of this,
Right,
like
right. Yeah, no, that's great. What popped into my mind as you were talking about it is like it's basic literacy for the body. And,
yes,
if you imagine skipping that in terms of language and grammar and being able to read and write,
hmm
what a tremendous disadvantage you would be at in life. And yet, most of us did skip basic body literacy because we weren't taught, or we were taught
Yeah.
the wrong way. So this is a chance to correct that. This is awesome. So what's the best way for people to connect with you, Graham, and find these programs?
Right now, Instagram, probably not. TikTok and Instagram is where like I put most stuff up. TikTok that's a wash because you can't actually message you. But like reach out on Instagram. It's at the Barefoot Sprinter, all one word. But that I have a website, and I'm gonna redo that and try to make it, because I've gotten the process of like building everything, and now it's like a year into the program, so now it's time to make it a little bit more like outwardly focused and clear. But Instagram would be the best way.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for coming on the show, and it's been a fascinating conversation. Really enjoyed connecting with you, and let's do it again sometime in the future.
I'd be honored to.
Thanks everyone for listening. Keep sending your questions to chriskresser.com/podcast question. That's the end of this episode of Revolution Health Radio. If you appreciate the show and want to help me create a healthier and happier world, please head over to iTunes and leave us a review. They really do make a difference. If you'd like to ask a question for me to answer on a future episode, you can do that at chriskresser.com/podcast question. You can also leave a suggestion for someone you'd like me to interview there. If you're on social media, you can follow me at twitter.com/chriskresser or facebook.com/chriskresser L.A.C. I post a lot of articles and research that I do throughout the week there that never makes it to the blog or podcast, so it's a great way to stay abreast of the latest developments. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you next time.